All right, welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my preview for the 2025 Qatar Grand Prix, the penultimate round of the F1 season. So first, starting out with our circuit layout, the Lusail track, 16 corners, 1 DRS zone, that of course being down the main straight. This track is obviously known for the fact that it has a lot of medium and high-speed corners, and it's very, very hard on the tires. So sector 1, this has the best overtaking zone on the track, and that is of course turn 1. In terms of other overtaking zones, some of the slower speed corners like turn 6, if you can somehow get a really good run and follow the car in front of you through turns 4 and 5, turn 6 is another option. The rest of sector 2 is really just slow speed, medium speed corners. And then sector 3, you have a bit more high speed stuff with the almost Turkey-esque turns 12, 13, and 14, followed by 15 and 16, the two final corners around the lap. Now, some stats for this track. It's 5.419 kilometers in length, and we're expected to have 57 laps of racing on Sunday. The race lap record is a 122.384, and the average speed of that lap is 237 kilometers an hour, which ranks 7th out of the 24 tracks on this year's calendar. And of course, that race lap record is held by Lando Norris, set last year. Now, downforce rating for this track is 0.34, so it's in the medium downforce range, I would say, probably a bit similar to Sao Paulo. Definitely higher downforce than what we had last time out in Vegas. Now, full throttle, drivers will be full throttle for about 68% of the lap, which is kind of middle of the range, I would say. And in terms of corner tendency, it leads itself towards high and medium high speed corners. Now, the pole to win ratio, we don't have a lot of races we haven't had a lot of races at this track, so a lot of these kinds of stats, it's a very, very small sample size, so it's not too accurate. But the pole to win ratio is 67%, so 2 out of 3. Same with the safety car percentage. 2 out of the 3 years we've had a safety car. Now, for rookies out qualifying their teammate, it's never happened, 0%, which ranks dead last, but there's only 2 rookies. I think the 2 rookies from last year, Lawson and Colbinto, I want to say, are the the only 2 who would have been eligible for that, although I guess maybe it might have been 3, so I guess I would include Norris and Sargent from the year before. Anyway, it's a track that, despite the small sample size, is generally not that favorable for rookies. Now, first race here, one of the newer races on the F1 calendar, of course, first held in 2021. And again, it has a track with a very long contract, 10 years, I believe it is. So again, we're going to be racing here for quite a few years in the future, despite the fact that it's, again, not really seen as a driver favorite. Well, actually, I think probably the drivers enjoyed driving it because it is probably a challenging track, but in terms of fan atmosphere, especially, it's generally not that high up. Now, tires for this weekend, we have the hardest 3 tires in the Pirelli range, soft C3, medium C2, and the hard C1. And that is because, like I said, this is a track that has been very, very hard on the tires, with very, very high lateral loads. Now, speaking of the tires, I have an extra note for this weekend, and that is that Pirelli are so concerned about the state of their tires that tires will be limited to 25 laps of racing. Now, if you remember from the couple slides ago when I talked about the length of the race is going to be 57 laps in length, so that means if the tires are limited to 25 laps, it's a mandatory 2-stop strategy. And those 25 laps include laps that are done in qualifying, cool down laps, but also laps behind virtual safety car or safety car. So I think we're probably not going to have a really good race on Sunday, just because we kind of saw this in 2023 with the curbs and how Pirelli basically had to instate tire limits there too. And again, it just means that the cars will be going very, very close to flat out for most of the race, and it makes it really, really hard for drivers to overtake each other unless, of course, someone starts massively out of position. So I think this is going to be a race where qualifying is going to be really important. And according to Pirelli, the high lateral energy has increased the structural fatigue of the construction, and like I said, effectively mandates a 2-stop strategy. Now, weekend schedule. So for Friday, FP1 4:30 p.m. local time, sprint qualifying 8:30 p.m. Weather for sprint qualifying 22 degrees and clear. Then we get Saturday sprint at 5 p.m., qualifying at 9 o'clock, and the expected temperature and the weather for qualifying is 21 degrees and clear. Then we get to Sunday, Grand Prix starts at 7 p.m. local time, with the expected weather being 23 degrees and clear. So pretty stable temperatures all 3 days. Again, that's good for the engineers, but again, it is a sprint weekend, so it could be a bit of a pain. If you don't get your setup right for sprint qualifying, that obviously compromises you for the sprint, and then potentially also compromises you for main qualifying, as we saw with Red Bull in Brazil. Now, taking a look at last year's race, 2024, won by Max Verstappen, of course, with Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri rounding out the podium. Now, the big talking point from last year's race was actually something that happened in qualifying, and that was the start of what was a pretty bitter feud between George Russell and Max Verstappen. If you don't remember, basically on a cool-down lap, Russell basically accused Verstappen of driving erratically, driving too slowly. And of course, in qualifying, if you block or impede another car, then you do get a penalty for that. But what made this even more egregious is that Russell appeared to be on a cool-down lap. He basically sped up and then accused Verstappen of blocking, and then went to the stewards and basically complained about it. And Verstappen was basically furious about this. And of course, Verstappen had initially taken pole, and he was given a 1-place grid penalty, so it basically forced him to start behind Russell. But again, that would be kind of a moot point, as Verstappen would end up leading and eventually winning the Grand Prix. Now, other big moments from the race, there was a first lap incident between Ocon and Franco Colapinto that saw the two of them out of the race. Lando Norris as well. I think during, I think it was during the yellow, right before the first safety car period. But what ended up happening was that I think Bottas or Albon lost their front wing, went on the main straight. I think the other car then drove over it, shattered it to pieces. They called out a safety car, and basically before that they had like double waved yellows. And Norris did not slow down during this point. He was given a pretty harsh stop and go penalty, but again, for safety reasons, it's understandable why those penalties are more harsh. So Lando gets his stop-go penalty, ruins his race. He goes from running second in the Grand Prix, looked like it was a pretty easy, comfortable podium finish, to being well outside the points. Of course, when he served his grid penalty, or not his grid penalty, but served the time penalty. And other big moments of the race was that Sergio Perez, in what was a pretty horrific end to his season, kind of foreboding what would end up happening with the Red Bull second seat into 2025, he basically spun and burned up the clutch in the closing stages of the race. And lastly, Guang Yu scored Sauber's only points of the season with an 8th place finish. It was a race where Sauber was a bit surprisingly much stronger than they had been the rest of the season. It was a pretty woeful season. But very, very good at this race, and Zhou was there to pick up the pieces, picking up 4 points, and his teammate Bottas finished in 11th. So, of course, led home Max Verstappen win, and that was, of course, Verstappen's second win in the second half of the season after Brazil, and it was seen as a bit of a surprise because the expectation going into this race, of course, was that McLaren should win, and between Piastri having a bit of an underperformance, where have we heard that before, and of course Norris's disastrous penalty, this was a race that basically swung the balance of power in the constructors quite a bit, and it made it so that the Constructors' Championship battle for 2024 went back in Mercedes, or basically it went down to Abu Dhabi and a final lap shootout between Ferrari and McLaren. So it kind of really shows how far Ferrari have fallen from this time last year. Now, before we go on to predictions and best drivers and qualifying and that kind of stuff, I want to take a look at title permutations, because this is the first weekend of the season where the Drivers' Championship can be won. So currently, of course, Lando Norris sits on 390 points, with Piastri and Verstappen sitting 24 points back. In terms of wins, which is, of course, the first tiebreaker, Norris and Piastri are tied on 7 wins, with Verstappen 1 back, which is why Piastri is ahead of Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship right now. But when you look at P2s, which again, depending on how things shake up, if things go down to the wire and drivers somehow end up tied, P2s could actually shake out who ends up being on top. And so for Norris, he actually is in the driver's seat when you look at P2s. He has 8 P2s. Piastri only 3, which is a bit of a surprise to me. And then Verstappen has 5. So he would have the edge if he was able to get another win, but then somehow tie Piastri at the end of the season. He would likely end up ahead. But for Norris, he has 7 wins, but he also has 8 P2s, which neither Piastri nor Verstappen can catch. He also has a 24-point advantage, so unless Verstappen somehow wins both Grand Prix, which would give him 8 for the season, there's a good chance that if Norris ends up tying with another driver, he's probably going to be out on top in terms of the countback. Now, in terms of becoming champion, Norris will become champion if he outscores both Piastri and Verstappen by 2 points over the weekend, but that requisite drops to only 1 point if he wins the Grand Prix. And the easiest way for that to work would be if, let's say Verstappen or Piastri win the sprint, but then Norris basically does really, really poorly, and then Norris wins the Grand Prix, and then that somehow magically ends up to being 25 points. And the other tidbit is that the title cannot be decided after the sprint, so you won't see a sprint champion like you did with Verstappen in 2023. Now, looking at best and worst qualifiers at this track, very, very small sample size. And interestingly, very similar results to what we had last time in Vegas. And again, I think some of the small sample size might be playing into that, and maybe some of the teammate head-to-head relationships might be part of that as well. But there were 5 drivers who have never been out-qualified by their teammates, and I've only put basically the top 3 here in terms of difference between that and the career average. But the best is Pierre Gasly, plus 37%, median qualifying gap of 2.5 tenths of a second. Second is Lando Norris, plus 29%, never been out-qualified here, despite the fact that, Piastri is kind of seen as having a good record at this track because he won the sprint in 2023. But median qualifying gap for Norris, very, very small, about 6 tenths of a second. Or 6 hundredths of a second, I should say. And then third is George Russell, plus 25%, median qualifying gap of 3.5 tenths of a second. Then we get to worst qualifiers. Worst is Esteban Ocon, negative 43%, never out-qualified a teammate here. Median qualifying gap of 3.8 tenths of a second. Then we get to number 2, and that's Lewis Hamilton, negative 30%, median qualifying gap of positive 8 hundredths of a second. And then Lance Stroll is number 3, negative 24% compared to his career average, and a median qualifying gap of a pretty diabolical 7 tenths of a second. Now, looking at qualifying predictions for this weekend, the 10 drivers who are predicted to out-qualify their teammates are Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell, Alonso, Gasly, Behrman, Hadjar, Sainz, and Bortoleto, because Hulkenberg's only done 2 races here, so not enough data here to basically be able to make a prediction there. Biggest gap is definitely the Verstappen Tsunoda one, not a big surprise. Smallest gap would be Sainz and Albon, so take a look at that one, or keep an eye out for that one this coming weekend. Now, for predictions, I think it's tempting on the form book to go with a Verstappen win, but I think looking at this kind of circuit, Red Bull have done very well at tracks which are low downforce with lots of slow speed corners, like Monza, Baku, and Vegas. But tracks like this, like Qatar, where there's a lot of medium speed corners, high speed corners, they generally tend to not do so well. The tracks where they can basically run very, very little wing, kind of like Silverstone or Suzuka, where they can basically just trim the wing out and trust Verstappen's driving ability to, compensate for the rest, has worked, but I'm not sure how well that's going to work. I think there's just too many medium high-speed corners here, and maybe a couple too many slow-speed corners as well. So I do think that the McLaren with slightly better aero efficiency should be the better car this weekend. Did their diabolical disaster in Vegas with the double disqualification with the plank, does that affect how things go? Hard to say. I think temperatures are also going to be a little bit cooler. The Pirelli race stint length limits is also something that does kind of go against McLaren this season. Qualifying is going to be very important, and that's something that Verstappen's generally been excellent at this season, of course, with the exception of Brazil, where Red Bull kind of just screwed up the setup. So, I think there's quite a few factors in play. Some of them favor Red Bull, but others, I think, especially the fact that this is a sprint weekend, and it's a track which I don't think Red Bull's going to have the easiest time getting a setup ready for. Means I do think, McLaren might be in a little bit of a better position. So for my predictions, I'm going to predict a Lando Norris win, which in all likelihood means that he will end up winning the championship in Qatar if that is the case. Second, I'm going to go with Piastri, and third, I'm going to go with Verstappen. Piastri has not been on the podium in quite a while, so again, this would be kind of going against the form book at the moment, but I'm not really super confident in either McLaren or either Mercedes or Ferrari this weekend, which will make it harder for those teams to, take points potentially off of Norris or Piastri. But should be a really exciting weekend. I'm hopeful that we'll have a last race title decider in Abu Dhabi. I think that would be a great way to, close out this regulation cycle. But again, with the points gap being as it is, Norris basically just needs to beat out the two drivers, Piastri and Verstappen, over this weekend. And the title is his, which will of course be his first title in Formula 1. So that's all for my preview for the 2025 Qatar Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.